It's Monday, December 12th, 2016. This is 3000 NFL mock draft, where myself, Kenneth Arthur of fieldgoals.com, and Rob Staten of Seahawks-Draftblog.com get together every week to talk about the NFL draft, the NFL, the Seahawks, and more. And there's plenty to talk about this week, as there is most weeks. Maybe there's a little bit more this week than others. So we've got plenty to get to. Maybe later in the podcast, we'll have Joe McAtee of Turf Show Times to preview the Seahawks and Rams game on Thursday, as well as talk about the early Black Monday firing of Jeff Fisher as the head coach of the Rams, the promotion of, I forget, is it John Fossil, not Jim Fossil. It's John Fossil, I think. I know it's not the other Fossil. I'm just trying to remember if his name is Jim or John or John. What's with these? Come on, parents, name your kids something. Now, I don't want you to go crazy, but let's get something a little bit more diffusal than, or actually, John Fossil would be. Listen, this is the worst opening to a podcast of all time, and we're just going to move forward. I know John Fossil, or the Fossil, Jim Fossil, one of the Fossils is the father to the son, so it's not brothers. And we are off to a great start. 3000 NFL mock draft. We are going to talk about that firing. We may have Joe McAtee here to come on in a little bit to talk about that. But first, we'll talk about the Seattle Seahawks and their blowout loss. We haven't said that in 5 years, to the Green Bay Packers on Sunday, 38-10. No way around it. The Seahawks got just their asses kicked. You know, we've seen them get their asses kicked for 2 and even 3 quarters and even 3.5 quarters. Plenty of time, not plenty of times, but a few times in the last 5 years. Their last blowout loss coming to the Cincinnati Bengals in 2011. But every single one of those times that they did get their asses kicked, they had done just enough ass kicking to keep all of those games close at some point. That moment never happened on Sunday in Lambeau Field, and the Seahawks just got destroyed. There were just, and it's the difference maybe in a few throws here where Russell Wilson overthrows his target, underthrows his target, throws 5 interceptions. Of course, that's not going to help. But it's the first time, it's one of the rare times where we see Russell Wilson truly struggle and never pick it back up. And, that's part of the game for every single player in the NFL. But when you don't see it happen to a guy very often, and he's, maybe he's only been look, Dak Prescott, people are calling for Dak Prescott, the guy with the best record in the NFL and one of the best rookies of all time, to be benched. So certainly not alone out there if you're hearing people rooting for the Seahawks that say that Russell Wilson is, not a good quarterback or something ridiculous like that. But Rob, what did you see on Sunday that was the most troubling thing for you as the Seahawks try and I don't think that we can even say try and make the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs. I don't even think you would say try and win the division. They're going to win the division. But what would you say was the most troubling thing you saw as far as the Seahawks getting to the Super Bowl?
Well, I think the most troubling thing, Kenny, from that performance was that the Seahawks, for me, and people who follow Seahawks Draft Blog and have read the things that I've written in the past will know that I'm not one to sort of overreact in this kind of way. But for me, they didn't look like a championship team. And, there's a kind of a saying that is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And when we looked at the Tampa Bay game, you kind of felt, look, this is an off day. It's a rare off day. Wilson didn't look good. The team didn't look great. It was an ugly loss. They were well beaten. And then in the very next road game, it got even worse. When you look at the way that they've performed against the NFC on the road, they've won 0 games, they've lost 4 times, and they've tied once. In those games, the offense has scored an average of 8.5 points. The defense, in fairness to it, people want to criticize the defense yesterday. If you turn the ball over 6 times, you're going to give up some points. The defense in those 5 games on the road in the NFC have given up 13.5 points. If you are giving up 13.5 points on the road, you're going to win a lot of football games. The Seahawks haven't won any against the NFC on the road, which is incredible. It's a really incredible statistic. And I think that the issue that I have with this team right now is that, as you mentioned, they will make the playoffs. I could see them winning a wild card game. I could see them winning a divisional game. especially if they're at home. I could see them winning every game in the playoffs, but I could equally see them getting absolutely shellacked at home or away, in the way that happened in Carolina last season, in the way that we saw last night, in the way that we saw against Tampa Bay. And that is the problem that I've got, is that this is a team that is fluctuating so much in so many different facets. They don't seem to know what they are. The identity seems to have gone. I've just written a blog post. It's going to go up tonight. The identity of the team seems to be completely dependent on what Russell Wilson does. If Russell Wilson has a bad game, then the running game gets washed away or abandoned completely. If the offense doesn't function, it puts a lot of pressure on the defense. If the offense then starts turning it over at a rapid rate, as they did in Tampa Bay and in Green Bay, then you're asking an awful lot of the defense to not concede points, especially when you're playing an opponent that has Aaron Rodgers. So I think there's a lot to be concerned about. And we started the year believing that this was a team that could potentially win the Super Bowl. That hasn't changed. But I find it very hard to feel particularly confident that this version of the Seahawks is going to win a Super Bowl in a few weeks' time.
Well, I appreciate you both saying that you have a lot of concerns about the offense, especially on the road, and saying that they could still win the Super Bowl because, I mean, you look – that's the other thing. You have to have perspective about the whole NFL. Look around the NFL and tell me which team looks unbeatable. None of them. This is going to be a wide open playoffs where I think anybody that's 1 to 6 has a chance to win the Super Bowl in each conference, at least to win the conference. The only close exceptions being maybe the winner of the AFC South, and other than that, I would say that's it. You know, I can't see a team in the AFC South, whether it be the Titans or the Texans, winning more than one game in the playoffs. But if you're talking about the Patriots, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Raiders, the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Seahawks, the Falcons, the Bucks, the Lions, the Packers, even the Vikings, the Cowboys, the Giants, even the Redskins or the Dolphins, I could see all of those teams getting hot for 3 or 4 games and winning the Super Bowl. I don't see any of them being one that's like, man, how are you going to stop those Cowboys? Well, I don't know, but the Giants did it twice. And maybe you got to have the right things that the Giants have, but you know, any team that's going into the playoffs with a rookie quarterback and a rookie running back and, a head coach who has not really had any success in the playoffs throughout his career, there's going to be, you can't call the Cowboys a great favorite. I can't call the Patriots a great favorite if they don't have Rob Gronkowski, and we'll see how they look against the Baltimore Ravens tonight after this podcast is finished. But I just wrote this article on Friday about the Baltimore Ravens, and it's like, man, they look a lot like the team in 2012 that just sort of surprised everyone and ran through the playoffs and got that Super Bowl. If it's a Giants-Ravens Super Bowl, that doesn't surprise me one bit. If it's a Seahawks-Patriots Super Bowl, that doesn't surprise me one bit either. So you got to have the perspective and also realize that, whether or not you like this team today or don't like this team today, if they win the Super Bowl, you will not give a shit how you feel today. You will not have those you will not be able to call back on those emotions. You will not be able to, recall why you said that they sucked so bad after getting beat by the Packers. You will not care that they got beat by the Packers. If the Seahawks go into the playoffs and just, and they'll still be, they're one of the healthiest teams in the NFL with the exception of Earl Thomas and a couple other players that look to be banged up right now, maybe Troy Maine-Pope. But you will look at them and you got to say this is a team with a lot of playoff experience, a quarterback that has plenty of great playoff games in the past. Look at Thomas Rawls over his last 4 games. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry. So Rawls is starting to get going. They've got Jimmy Graham and Doug Baldwin. They've got all these great defensive players. So, putting them up against anybody, and I cannot get scared of the Detroit Lions because they are the Detroit Lions. I can't get that scared of the Atlanta Falcons because we've seen them beat the Falcons. And I think that they match up well in that game against the Falcons. If there's concerns maybe about the fact that, anytime that Earl Thomas leaves a game, they get destroyed up the middle. That's got to be somewhat of a concern. He didn't play in Tampa Bay, and those first 2 drives were very easy touchdowns to Mike Evans, though they locked it up after that. He goes out and the first play against the Carolina Panthers, it's a long touchdown pass. Even if it was a yard short and it should have been called not a touchdown pass, still a long pass. And then this past game against the Green Bay Packers, like you said, it wasn't like Green Bay's offense was super spectacular, but they did manage to almost completely knock Seattle out of the running for both the Football Outsiders DVOA championship this season, which would have been their 5th straight, and the scoring title, scoring title for the 5th straight season. So that's just what happened. And it's not about making excuses. It's just about lining them up against every other team in the NFL and realizing that they still might be the most talented team. They're still a team that has won playoff games in each of the last 4 years. And they're still a team that, if you're giving me 10-1 odds on the Super Bowl and those are like the 5th best odds or something, I'm going to take it because I still think they look pretty good. There can't be anyone, Rob, that you see out there that is really scaring you right now, is there?
Well, I don't think scaring would be the word that I would use, but I think there are teams out there that are doing what the Seahawks have done in the past, which is sort of really bringing everything together and playing really good, balanced, physical, competitive football. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have won something like 4 games in a row. They went to Kansas City and beat Kansas City. They beat Seattle comprehensively. They got another good win at the weekend against New Orleans. There was another victory before that as well. They're playing really well. I wouldn't be scared of playing Tampa Bay, for example, especially if that game was at CenturyLink. I would fancy Seattle's chances to perform better if they have to go to Tampa Bay, which seems unlikely given the placings of both teams right now. But I would still say that right now you would look at them and say they're playing better. And the sort of one of the counters maybe I would say to some of the points you made there, Kenny, is that you could look at Seattle's roster right now and you could make a case for saying, even with Earl Thomas out, this is the most talented roster in the NFL. You could point to every single big name star player that they've got on this roster and say, other teams cannot compare to the talent that this Seahawks team has. But for whatever reason, week to week, you just have no idea what is going to happen. I mean, who can you rely on right now? Which area of this team do you know is going to perform on any given Sunday? And that is the problem that they've got. I mean, is Russell Wilson going to throw 3 touchdowns this? I mean, here's the difference. Russell Wilson is so good that he's capable of throwing 3 touchdowns against the New England Patriots on the road, 0 interceptions, 70% completions, and a quarterback rating of 124.6. And then in the 5 games on the road against the NFC, he's had 1 touchdown and 8 interceptions. I mean, you just do not know what you're going to get from the guy right now. Some of the interceptions that he's throwing are just so uncharacteristic. The one against Carolina, which I actually paused and forced, I was so frustrated by because it was, it was 2 plays later, I think it was, that Earl Thomas broke his leg and there was kind of like a sliding doors effect to that. I was so frustrated by it. I made my poor suffering wife sit there while I had a little bit of a rant at the interception that he threw. He's thrown that into coverage where there were 4 Carolina defenders smothering, I think, Jermaine Kearse. And people want to... Hugh Millen asked Pete Carroll at the press conference today, you're thinking of dumping Jermaine Kearse. There's only quarterback rating of 60 when he throws to him. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, if that's one of the throws that you're counting, how on earth why is he throwing that pass to Jermaine Kearse in that situation? It's a disaster. The pick to Jimmy Graham that kind of started the snowball on Sunday was equally ill-advised. He's missing. He's overthrowing, but he's not overthrowing, he's underthrowing. His accuracy is completely off. I mean, he just does not look right. You don't know what you're going to get from him. Thomas Rawls, really exciting, fun player to watch, is producing stats. And yet I just get this impression that teams are not particularly worried about him, that they are looking at this. And whereas in the past they were thinking, hey, we've got to stop Marshawn, we've got to limit Russell Wilson, we've got to do that, we've got to look after this, we've got to contain the guy, we've got so many things to play with. And I just get this impression that teams are looking and they're going, yeah, do you know what? The Seahawks can have 100 rushing yards today. They can have 5 yards a pop. We just need to impact the quarterback, Russell Wilson, and we can beat this team. We can they will abandon the running game, even if they're getting 5 yards a carry. Even if they start the game and Thomas Rawls has 40 yards from 6 carries or whatever he had yesterday, it doesn't matter. They will go away from that running game if we impact that quarterback. That's an issue. So even if Russell, he had 12 carries yesterday, he had, we can say, hey, he's running the ball nicely. Teams are taking away the run because they're impacting the pass. And then you look on defense. I mean, Deshaun Shedd's had a really great year. he looked terrible yesterday. Jeremy Lane is developing into a bit of a scapegoat. I don't think he's had a great season. I also don't think he's played particularly badly. He gets beat a couple of times. You see the KJ Wright, who's having the best year of his career, arguably, is slipping and sliding all over the place. He's being asked to cover Randall Cobb. The four-man rush isn't working, and it took them about a half of football to suddenly realise that, hey, we need to blitz Aaron Rodgers and we need to not be as tentative because he's just taking everything that's there for him. You don't know what you're going to get from the pass rush, from the passing game, from the secondary to the running game to, Jimmy Graham will be brilliant one week, he'll be anonymous the next. Overall, it's a great group of players. As a cumulative team, there's no consistency. There's no real identity. They are not the team I suspect they want to be. The pass rush is up and down. And that's a problem because if they want to be a championship winning team, I don't think it's going to be the most talented team that wins the Super Bowl in this muddled NFL season. It is going to be the team that gets hot and balanced and consistent and solid going into those playoffs, that can rush the passer, that can run the ball, that has a quarterback that takes what is given and doesn't turn it over. Those are the teams that are going to prosper. The Seahawks can have all the talent in the world. Unless they bring it together in the next few weeks, they are not going to, I do not think they're going to win a Super Bowl. They can do it. They've got 3 games to get some momentum and to get back on track. But that has to be the absolute priority in these next 3 games.
Well, I mean, I'll just say, I think that the Seahawks are going to go 11-4-1. We talked about their, struggles on the road. They've got 2 home games against 2 bad teams, the Rams and the Cardinals. The Cardinals are giving up on the season. I think they're putting players on IR. It's pretty much end of the season for the Cardinals. The Rams just fired their head coach. Yes, Thursday games are funky and the Rams suck and all that, but they've got new head coach. There's so much going on. They're a terrible team. They have the worst quarterback in the NFL. And then the only thing standing in their way, if they can win the next 2 home games, and as you said, their record at home, they're 6-0. They pretty much blow everyone out at home, with the exception of good teams like the Falcons, who they still beat at home, and the Dolphins, who have turned out to be a really good team, who they still beat. So I think that they're going to go 11-4-1, and I don't think that the Lions are going to win out. So therefore, I think it's pretty clear to me still that the Seahawks have a heavy odds-on favorite to get the number 2 seed. So then their playoffs, when you look at it, and if you say the Cowboys are the 1 seed and the Seahawks are the 2 seed, and let's just say that the Lions are the 3 seed and the Falcons are the 4 seed, and the wild cards are the Giants and the Bucks, which is actually looking pretty clear at this point. They only have a 1-game lead maybe on the Packers and the Vikings, but I mean, let's just say that that's the case. Then the Seahawks get another week to get healthy or rest up and, prepare. And then they're hosting the Giants or the Lions or the Falcons or the Bucks. And I don't really get too worked up about any of those teams. Really, the only thing standing in their way would be the Cowboys. And there's a chance, that if the Giants win, they go to the playoffs as a wild card, and if they go to Detroit or Atlanta or Tampa Bay or whatever and win that game, which all they have to do is win that game, then they're the ones playing the Cowboys. The Cowboys only lost to the Giants this year, so it might not even be having to go to Dallas. The Seahawks could be hosting both playoff games in the NFC and still, and then be facing the Giants and the Lions or whatever just to get to the playoffs, just to get to the Super Bowl, where who knows, they're playing the Steelers or the Patriots or the Oakland Raiders or the Kansas City Chiefs. Nothing too frightening to me in any of those situations. And I'm not saying that it's like what I'm going to, predict, but it's just going along the lines of looking down the line and maybe saying, maybe the Seahawks don't have to be perfect. All they really need to do, and you can see this throughout their schedule this year, not all they really need to do, but a big part of what they need to do is just don't lose the turnover battle. When they lose the turnover battle 6-0 against the Packers, they get blown out, of course. They lose the turnover battle to the Bucks 3-2. They lose 14-2. They lose the turnover battle to the LA Rams in week 2. They lose that one. And they lose that game by turning it over once, and the Rams didn't turn over at all. They tied the turnover battle against the Cardinals when they tied, and they tied the turnover battle against the Saints when they lost. But when they win the turnover battle, they're pretty much very hard to beat. So going up against any of those teams, it's just like, okay, how can we mitigate, these mistakes that Wilson has made? And really, let's talk about the fact that Russell Wilson has thrown 10 interceptions, but 7 of them have come in the last 3 games. There was also that Russell Wilson who for, a stretch of 7 or 8, 9 games threw 1 interception. So, there is that other Russell Wilson that didn't exist not too long ago. He's also been sacked 12 times in the last 3 games. What are we going to do what are the Seahawks going to do in order to mitigate that? There's also the fact that, hey, the Seahawks are now running the football a little bit better. There's just so many other factors where it's like we can't. I realize that the road version of the Seahawks is pretty bad on offense, but the home version is pretty damn good. And I'm not really thinking that going to San Francisco in Week 17 is going to be a problem in terms of picking up a win. The 49ers and Rams might be the 2 worst teams in the NFL, even worse than the Browns, if we're talking about the product that they're putting on the field today. So other than that, and a home game against the Cardinals, they should be getting the 2 seed in my mind, unless the Lions can somehow manage to beat the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Packers in the next 3 weeks. I think that that's going to happen. And then I have to think about, like, can they just beat the other teams? Can they, beat the teams that they have to beat, rather than do they have to be perfect every week? Do they have to, does Russell Wilson have to be the MVP of the NFL in order for the Seahawks to be good? No, they just need to figure out how to clean up these mistakes. And hopefully get as many home games as possible in the playoffs. They can't really control Dallas's fate anymore. But when you look down the line and see that, if you can see that Giants-Cowboys game in the divisional round, it's not that crazy to me to see a situation where the Seahawks are hosting the NFC Championship. And I think that they can get better. So it's, I'm pretty optimistic overall, but and I see all the problems for Seattle, of course. But I guess it's too soon for me to panic about a team that is, in my mind, is very close to getting a top 2 seed and a bye week. And then, all the cards are sort of off the table. What players do you think have disappointed you the most in the last few weeks besides Russell Wilson? Because maybe we don't talk a lot about, some of the other guys that are out there, like Tyler Lockett or Jimmy Graham or Doug Baldwin. Obviously, we talk a lot about Jermaine Kearse. Are there any of the performances, like Jeremy Lane, any of the performances individually that concern you very bad or a lot besides Russell Wilson?
Not really, because I think a lot of the players that have performed poorly have equally then sort of turned up the next week and played pretty well. I mean, it's been quite an inconsistent season for a lot of different players. I mean, you could really sort of nitpick a few of the guys there. I mean, I will say that I'm very disappointed with Alex Collins. As somebody, when we did the podcast last year, as somebody who was very positive about Alex Collins at Arkansas, he just seems incredibly tentative. He's allowed Tremaine Pope to come back onto this team and basically usurp him. He never really got into the battle at the start of the year. In a season when Thomas Rawls and CJ Prosise have both had lengthy injury spells, and with Kristen Michael, eventually getting back in the doghouse and cut, for him to not have, any kind of impact this year, apart from fumbling the ball a couple of times, it's been a real disappointment. But Wilson is sort of the main sort of focus of my disappointment. At the end of last year, he was arguably finishing the season the best player in the NFL, at any position. Had the best season statistically of his career. He was showing that, life after Marshawn Lynch didn't have to be a major issue for the Seahawks, because he could lead the way. He could be the thing that defined this team. And then this year, yes, the injuries have had a big impact there. I've no doubt that this would have been a completely different season if Russell Wilson hadn't got that ankle injury in week 1, and then ultimately the knee injury against San Francisco, and then maybe the pecs hurt him a little bit more than he's letting on. I think that we will discover at the end of the year that, whether it's Carroll or somebody or an anonymous source will say that, this guy was essentially really banged up for the whole season. I know that the sort of dynamic on the TV is he's looking healthy again. He's running, he's scrambling, he's doing this. I still don't think he looks 100%. I still think there's a bit of a tentative nature to him there that we haven't seen in the past. I don't think he's running, sprinting at the kind of speed that he would if he was 100%. So I think that is having a bit of an impact there, but his accuracy is gone. I mean, I don't want to speculate on reasons why this might be. I just want to sort of see an improvement. And, I've been quite negative. I think, I'm big on perspective. You said it earlier, Kenny. I think that there's nothing wrong with being negative about the football team as long as it is rational. It's not just sort of looking for a scapegoat and just blaming individuals and saying this guy needs to be cut or this guy needs to be fired. If you're rational and you've got perspective, then I think criticizing a football team is perfectly acceptable. But I want to offer some perspective here. I'm looking at at some of the recent Super Bowl winners in the past. When New Orleans won the Super Bowl in the 2009 season, they finished the year losing their last 3 games. So they lost at home to Dallas, they lost at home to Tampa Bay, and then they lost on the road to Carolina 23-10. They lost the last 3 games. They went into the playoffs with no momentum at all, and then they beat Peyton Manning and the Colts in the Super Bowl. So, they managed to turn that around. In 2008, when it was Pittsburgh that won the Super Bowl. If you remember, they beat Arizona in the Super Bowl. Pittsburgh in Week 16, so the penultimate game of the year, went to Tennessee and lost 31-14. So they were hammered. A similar scoreline to what the Seahawks have just experienced in Green Bay. So they lost late in the season. They got hammered by Tennessee. And then they went on and won the Super Bowl. And then in 2011, this was the Giants' second Super Bowl with Eli Manning. They actually finished 9-7. They had a 4-game losing streak from Week 10 to Week 13. They lost to Green Bay in Week 13 at home, conceded 38 points, very similar to the Seahawks. And in Week 15, they lost at home to the Washington team 23-10. So they were pummeled at home by Washington 2 weeks before the end of the playoffs. And, it just goes to show that you might have, teams in the past have had bad results like the Seahawks had on Sunday. And maybe those results inspire them a little bit. Maybe maybe being punched on the nose late in the season, it hasn't always been such a bad thing for a team. Maybe the Seahawks needed this. If you want to take the positive angle, maybe this will just focus a few minds, will make people realize that if they don't want this to be a wasted season, they've got to get on with it now. Unlike Carolina last year, they have more games to play after that Green Bay loss. So this might act as a good thing for the Seahawks. And as you mentioned there, they have a perfect opportunity to win out here, to win the final 3 games, to have some momentum, to get the number 2 seed. And then if they get the number 2 seed, Kenny, it sounds quite easy when you put it in these terms. All they would have to do to get to a Super Bowl is win 2 games. One of them guaranteed to be at home. That's not the most difficult thing for a team that has had as much success as this team has over the years. So, it's good that the game's on Thursday. It's good that we can move on. It's great that we don't have a week talking about how bad the Seahawks were. We get basically 2 days and then we get to move on to look ahead to this Rams game. Let's hope they get a really, really, really easy, big home win against a Rams team that fired their coach today. And we just put this behind us and then go and beat the Cardinals, who are banged up like crazy. They've got about 3 guys on IR today, including Deion Buchanan. And then go and beat the 49ers in the final week of the season and get into those playoffs with a bit of momentum. If they can do that, then this doesn't have to be a wasted season.
And before we talk about the Rams game, because we'll give Joe McAtee a chance to check in before we'll see if he comes in. We're not sure exactly what his status is. There was something about chopping onions, but we're going to see what happens there. So we'll give him a chance to maybe come in and chime in before we talk about the Rams too much. So maybe let's take a minute to step back and look at the Heisman voting. It was pretty obvious, I think, overall that Lamar Jackson would win the Heisman Trophy. They didn't have to be, sort of like in the NFL. the Heisman winner did not have to be perfect this season. There was not a lot of competition. There was not like anyone screaming from Alabama to be recognized as a Heisman Trophy winner. And they were the only team that was, undefeated, the only team that really looked to be dominating anybody. So it was sort of a wide open, like, who's the best player on a team that's really good? So Lamar Jackson getting in first, followed by Deshaun Watson of Clemson, Baker Mayfield of Oklahoma, D.D. Westbrook also of Oklahoma, and Jabril Peppers of Michigan. And then Washington's Jake Browning finishing sixth. Not really, nobody besides Deshaun Watson really having a shot at catching Lamar Jackson. But it was kind of, I guess, a little surprising that Jake Browning didn't really have any traction whatsoever in the race, as did, a lot of people that we didn't even talk about, like, Baker Mayfield and D.D. Westbrook in terms of being in the Heisman race, and definitely looked different than it was in the preseason. So any thoughts on, Lamar Jackson, his Heisman legacy now that as he has this season with Louisville, or the order of the guys that were in the Heisman voting? Anybody you thought should have been a lot higher or was way too high?
Yeah, I had a real issue with the Heisman Trophy this year because, for starters, the best team in the country, without doubt, is Alabama. How many Alabama players were at the were in New York for the final? I mean, it's just ridiculous. I don't think any were there. No, they weren't.
Yeah, just Jonathan Allen finished seventh, it looks like, in the Heisman.
Yeah, I mean, would it have really hurt them to have had Jonathan Allen, or, in my opinion, Reuben Foster there? I mean, or even the freshman quarterbacks had a really good year. I mean, one of those guys had to be there. The issue that I have with the Heisman, Kenny, is that I just find it such a frustrating award, in that essentially it just becomes the most productive or most exciting, in this case, quarterback in the country. The best player in college football doesn't have to be a quarterback. I guess that the fact that the college teams don't officially have statistics for defense maybe makes it a little bit harder to justify it. But, I would have loved to have seen Reuben Foster there, or Jonathan Allen, or one of the Bama players, personally. So that was the first issue I had with it. I can't understand the decision to have Baker Mayfield and D.D. Westbrook there. I mean, these are two guys. I mean, first of all, what has Oklahoma achieved this year other than to underwhelm again and then finish on a hot streak in the worst conference to watch in college football? I mean, the Big 12, Oklahoma could put me and you in at running back, Kenny, and I'd fancy to get 5 yards of carry between us. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible conference. And it's incredibly easy to put up big yards and big statistics. And that doesn't seem to have been taken into account when they put the quarterback and the wide receiver from Oklahoma on the ballot for the final ballot. And to not have Jake Browning on there after everything that he did at Washington, and to not have any of the Alabama guys on there, I just don't understand. I mean, like, why Baker Mayfield? It's just, and Ohio State are the number two team in the country, according to the playoff. They have a quarterback who's been quite productive. They have a wide receiver running back called Curtis Samuel, who has impacted a lot of games. They have decent defensive players, and none of these guys got much of a say either. You look at Deontay Freeman's had a good year at Texas. Why is his statistics at Texas any weaker than Baker Mayfield's or D.D. Westbrook's? Dalvin Cook's had a good year. He was tied 10th. Jake Browning ended up 6th. I really didn't understand sort of the surrounding sort of, apart from the guy who won it. I think that the sort of 4 after him were all wrong. That said, Lamar Jackson has been, without doubt, unmissable TV this year. He's an incredibly unique, exciting player. And although Louisville's season tailed off towards the end, I think you could certainly make a case for him being the best. And I think that he's somebody who's going to be so much fun to watch next year. And he's going to be talked about a lot as a pro quarterback. I think he's got huge steps he needs to make to get anywhere close to being as good as some people have him penned. And I think his character and his personality has to come out of his shell a little bit as well. But he's without doubt the most exciting quarterback in college football. And every time Louisville's on the TV, you can't help but be interested.
Well, it's interesting when you say that to talk about Lamar Jackson next season. And my first immediate thought is, how many of these guys that we get that win the Heisman Trophy or come close to winning the Heisman Trophy, and they're only freshmen or sophomores, and we say, man, can't wait to see him next year, another year of seasoning. It's going to be even better next year. How many of them do we see just have underwhelming seasons? Deshaun Watson being right there, even though he finished second in the Heisman voting. He was supposed to run away with the trophy. He has to go back to school. He falls from maybe being the top overall pick to maybe a day 2 or even day 3 pick. You get, plenty of other guys. Like, was Tim Tebow's last season his best season? Was Johnny Manziel? All these guys that it seems like they have to, Sam Bradford, they have to come back. I think that was a choice, but he had to come back and everything. Do you think there will come a time, or that we should talk about a time when guys should be able to declare for the NFL after their freshman or sophomore season? Because it seems like all we're saying to Lamar Jackson, even if he is intent on being a quarterback, even if he is intent, even if he is not, ready to be a good quarterback, if it's his choice to not want to come back to school, even if he wants to, transition to being a wide receiver or continue to play, and say, I'll take my chances, just like in the way that Cardale Jones is taking his chances with the Buffalo Bills. He's a 4th round pick, but he's getting paid, he's making, $500,000 or whatever, as opposed to the fact that Lamar Jackson comes back and, maybe we don't even talk about him in a year from now, because it's hard. This is why guys don't win the Heisman Trophy 2 years in a row. It's their biggest game of the year is whichever defense is facing off against Lamar Jackson. It's going to be the entire game plan for the entire offseason. And you're telling a 19, 20, 21-year-old to live up to those expectations. And it seems like maybe it should just be like, hey, we know that we're kind of screwing these guys over that are great recruits now. Like if they're, they have a committee for these kinds of things, but it's like, even if there were a way to say like, hey, we decided that this group of guys that are underclassmen can actually declare for the NFL draft now because we don't want to screw them up. Do you think there's anything to that? Do you worry at all for guys like Lamar Jackson having to come back and do the follow-up season to the Heisman year?
I think that, the whole topic of, whether players should be able to declare whenever they want. I mean, I'm really torn on it. I can kind of see both sides. I mean, like, there's a selfish part of me that enjoys the fact that you have to be there for 3 years. It means we get a chance to, watch these players develop in college. We get to, properly look at them. We don't have like ridiculously talented draft classes with like 1 million great players in, and then a draft class the following year where there's, it looks really, really bad. But that's the selfish part. The human sort of rights part of it all, I just find I really struggle with this idea that you have to be in college for 3 years. You have to. Football is an incredibly physical game. You see players like Nick Chubb having one of the most horrific injuries you could ever imagine anybody suffering, and he's doing this for what exactly? For absolutely nothing other than room, some snacks, the odd meal on campus or whatever, and the chance to sort of represent a school who is making a lot of money. And to not pay the players anything, to put the bodies on the line, I don't understand how it is allowed to happen. And I think the sooner that college players are paid or compensated, the better, because that will allow players that's at least a chance to make some money while they're putting their livelihoods on the line. And it may just encourage 1 or 2 players not to sort of fight this and feel the need to sort of campaign to go after 1 year, or to feel like that they're being essentially slaves to a corporation, or an organization or a university for 3 years, a 3-year sentence before they can actually go out there and earn some money for their talents. I think it really sits quite uncomfortably with me, that. And I do hope that they can come to something, because I don't think it's right that there are so many people making money off these guys who are playing for the pride of essentially representing a certain team. And
we know also that the NFL is. Just that they're, that there now has been talk in the last month that, after this year, Troy Vincent and the NFL Players Association will start making their pitches or towards having a developmental league or, sort of a spring league, which could also give an opportunity for guys who, want to transfer schools or, the things aren't working out to just be like, look, I'm 18 or I'm 19. I think I got some good talent here. Maybe let me develop it. Maybe let me develop for an actual NFL team rather than transferring to Alabama State A&M.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't, look, I don't really know much more to say on it. I mean, I just think that I just think it's a really tough situation. I really hope that there can be some resolution to a lot of things they talk about. You have the fact when the moving teams thing's another thing. You essentially sign up to play for this team and it doesn't work out, or somebody else plays better. You want to transfer. You have to waste a year of your life waiting for the opportunity to play for the other team, and I just find it really, really difficult to sort of explain. If I was to sit with somebody from Britain, from England over here, and say, "This is how it operates," they wouldn't believe what I was saying. I mean, it's an American concept that is exclusive to sort of college sport over in America. And if I truly believe that if I said, right, okay, I've got this idea for the English Premier League, this is how we're going to do youth systems now, and these players, we're not going to pay them, but they're not allowed to go turn pro for 3 years. They have to give everything to us, and we're going to make a load of money off it. And then after 3 years, we may allow them to go off and have an actual pro career. I don't think it would get through the Human Rights Act. I mean, I just think that it's so. I hope that they will pay the players sooner rather than later.
Well, among those who have declared for the NFL draft early are Deshaun Watson, Wayne Gallman, Mike Williams, Artavis Scott, Charles Walker, Eddie Vanderdoes, Demoria Stringfellow, Malik McDowell, Christian McCaffrey, Nazir Jones, Charles Harris, Leonard Fournette, Donta Foreman, and James Conner, all of whom we've spoken, well, not all of them, some of whom we've spoken about extensively, some of whom I've never heard of. So that's interesting always when you get into people like James Conner, running back at Pitt, or Nazir Jones, defensive tackle at North Carolina, and talking about whether or not Artavis Scott, wide receiver Clemson, and I don't know where you think about all those guys, but obviously the biggest news was DeShone Kizer, the quarterback at Notre Dame, decided to go to the NFL after a pretty not too successful career. What are your thoughts now at this moment? Do you think Kizer is doing the right thing, where it is sort of a season where none of the quarterbacks are standing out maybe at this point, that he could take advantage of a moment where there are going to be several teams in the top 15 or 20 picks needing a quarterback that might feel like they're pulling a Christian Ponder and just take a guy because he's there and they need a quarterback, or an EJ Manuel. Any thoughts on DeShone Kizer declaring for the NFL draft, or any of the other guys mentioned?
Well, I think on Kizer, personally, I thought he would have benefited from going back to Notre Dame and just having more game experience. I mean, we talked about it a few weeks ago. When the talk was that he could potentially, Adam Schefter, I think, tweeted out or wrote an article that said he could go first overall. That teams are very high on him, and at that point, when he was reporting that, if you want to call it a report, he'd played something like, I think he'd started, a handful of college games, and like Jared Goff had played like 2 or 3 times as many college games before he turned pro. And, game experience and actually being out there on the field is important. And it's also important to remember that Kizer didn't start the year as the starter at Notre Dame. He started splitting snaps with Malik Zaire, if you remember, in that game against Texas. And then, the subsequent 2 or 3 weeks, I think they were kind of in and out. Zaire would have a few snaps, Kizer would have a few snaps. It's not often that you have a future, first round pick who's essentially splitting time. And then the other thing that the issue was that Kizer's play, as more and more focus went his way deteriorated. So I can remember, I think it was I want to say it was against Rice. Did they play Rice or was it Duke? It was one of those teams. Played him about week 4. And the accuracy on some of his throws was just horrendous, Kenny. I mean, he was throwing behind. He had one horrible, ugly interception where it was just a terribly thrown pass, behind the receiver, miscommunication or whatever. But it was just a really ugly looking throw, and he had several of those. And while you would look at him and say he's got the size, he's mobile, he can make plays with his legs, he's physical, he's got the arm strength. His character, if you listen to him being interviewed, is really, really good. I can see teams meeting with him and saying, yeah, do you know what, we can invest in this guy. My only concern is that he's going to be a bit of an EJ Manuel, that he's going to be somebody who ends up going in the first round because of potential and is just not ready, not good enough, not accurate enough, and, is not going to get the time he needs to sort of sit and learn and do everything. And it's hard to judge where he could go because, you hear at the start of the year that he could be the number 1 overall pick. Then that sort of tempers away because he's playing poorly. If he ends up in the first round, it's hard to criticize his decision. If he ends up in round 4, then yes, we will look back and say it was a poor decision to make. It just seems like Notre Dame are a bit of a mess right now. Brian Kelly has not done a very good job there this year. Perhaps he didn't fancy going back to Notre Dame, and this is a majorly more positive alternative for him. Maybe he just wants to get paid. Who knows what his motivation is? Why it is interesting, it may mean that someone like the left tackle there, McLennan, might end up declaring as well, because if this spirals now and more people start to declare from Notre Dame, that would be a boost to teams that need offensive tackles, because he is somebody who could potentially go in the first round as well. So we'll have to wait and see there. In terms of some of the other names that got that have declared, no big surprises so far. The likes of Deontay Freeman we expected to declare. Van der Does at UCLA, I'm not a big fan of at all, to be honest. I can't remember some of the other names you mentioned there, but I've not seen a name that's been particularly surprising until perhaps Deshaun Kaiser today.
It is, as you said, Mel Kiper earlier in the year, I guess, had ranked Kaiser as the number 2 prospect on the board behind Deshaun Watson. Obviously, those things change. And Kiper just this last week saying, I don't see any other first rounders in the group in terms of quarterback, the first one being Mitch Trubisky, and Deshaun Kaiser has to go back to school. That's how quickly it's like in the beginning of the year, it's like, yeah, my number 2 prospect to, oh, this guy's got to go back to school, and it's like, there has to be at some point to be, what do we know about a guy and how much are we going to change that opinion about a guy? Because it's like the same thing with Russell Wilson. If you didn't think by the end of his rookie year that he was going to be a great quarterback, then, it was, we always have flash in the pans, but definitely if you didn't think that he was going to be great after his 3rd year, that's why I'm not panicking because he has some bad games. These are so uncharacteristics that it's totally unbelievable for me to think that way. So it's like there has to be some sort of, I don't want to say accountability, but just being like, this is the way that it's going to be, because that's where maybe these guys can get confused or get excited and they see those big dollar signs or whatever, and maybe Kaiser will have a good NFL career. Maybe those things wouldn't have changed with another year at Notre Dame, who knows. But it does seem like if it's the type of class where there might only be one guy at a quarterback with a first-round grade, and I'm a quarterback that might be the 2nd or 3rd best on the list, I might declare just because of you think that maybe you're going to have a better chance at getting a first-round contract, which is going to be guaranteed for 4 years with a 5th-year option, as opposed to a later round contract. That's a pretty good deal, and I have to go for the money in many cases because I think that the rest of it, the football, will only fall into place with hard work and whatever talent you already had anyway. So that would be the most important thing to me, because I do see like these years, and I look at it now, I'm like, I see the teams that'll be picking in the first round in the top 20, and it's like the Browns have an extra pick, and there's going to be certain teams that may not that may make that sort of call to be like, yeah, if we're the Cardinals, maybe just go with Deshaun Kaiser and, let him develop for a while. I believe that Joe McAtee of Turf Show Times is back with us now, joining the podcast. Joe, if I'm correct, go ahead and say hello.
Hi, and I'm really excited to talk about first-round picks with you guys as a Rams fan. Where should I jump in?
It's
and by the way, it's not Joe McAtee anymore. It's Tease McAtee. All the kids are changing their name to Tease.
Tease McAtees is
That's right.
Joining us from Turf Show Times, LA Rams blog. Been on the podcast many times, so you remember him, of course. And lots of stuff going on with the Rams today, and that's probably part and parcel with whether or not, wasn't sure when or if Joe would join us on the podcast tonight. But Joe, you've managed to make it through. And I guess as this day is unfolded with Jeff Fisher being fired early in the year and not having any confidence in the press conference by owner Stan Kroenke in terms of general manager Les Snead, any surprises to you during today's unfolding of events with the Rams?
Just the timing. When we closed up shop yesterday, with people saying Jeff Fisher needed to be fired, I said there was nothing different about yesterday that was different about this team 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago or week 1 when they lost 0-28 to the San Francisco 49ers. Anything fundamentally different than the team a year ago at this time outside of where their headquarters was located. So, the one real surprise was just the timing. I figured they would wait until the end of the season, allow him to slip quietly into the offseason darkness and then pick up on whatever strings they had started pulling for the coaching search at this point. But other than that, no, I think, when you're one loss away from holding the all-time loss record outright and working on your 5th consecutive losing season, continued employment is not something you should expect.
Rob, I want to open up the floor as well. If you have any questions for Joe in terms of his perspective as, being a Rams fan and whether or not, whatever you see it, though you would be curious about from someone that, because the Seahawks and the Rams have had very different experiences in the last, 5 years. Even it only muddies the waters more to consider that the Rams have won 4 of the last 5 games. I want to open up the chance if you have any questions for Joe as well, Rob.
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions actually, because this is such an interesting story as a Seahawks fan, sort of following this. So I guess first of all, what does this mean for Greg Williams? Presumably, he's going to leave the team. Is he still going to be coaching the team to the end of the year? Do you know? I suppose the other questions I would have is, what type of a coach do you think is necessary now? If you were to look out there, who are the kind of the names that interest you and other Rams fans the most? And also, how important is it to have somebody who is offensive minded? Because the most important thing for this team is clearly going to be developing Jared Goff over the next few years.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one. Let's take Greg Williams. So no word on his status and no word on any other staff changes to this point, which I don't think is surprising. I mean, they've got some continuity that they built into the coaching staff that they want to try to get through. And, a lot of I'd say this about Greg Williams. I think he's done a better job this year with the defense than he had last year. I think the personnel took a hit. The Rams lost 4 starters on defense: Chris Long, James Laurinaitis, Janoris Jenkins, and Rodney McLeod. And only James Laurinaitis, into this year looks like he's not a competent NFL player. Janoris Jenkins might make the Pro Bowl. Rodney McLeod isn't far behind that level. And Chris Long is maybe one of those guys who's renewed the kind of last chapter of his career, obviously, with the Patriots. So I'm not sure what's next for Greg Williams. I don't think this year or this saga under Jeff Fisher has hurt his resume all that much. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if he's in the mix for some head coaching jobs, only because of the job that he's done this year and kind of resurrected his career with Fisher and with the Rams. That being said, I don't think anybody on the staff is going to be around. I think if you're going to bring in a new head coach, you got to give him the chance to just clean house, bring his guys in, whoever that is. If he looks at it and he says, grow. Wide receivers coach or Greg Williams or John Fossil, the special teams coach, is going to be the interim head coach to finish out the year. If that's somebody he wants to keep, I think that's fine, but I don't think he should be under any pressure to try to keep this staff around. Again, it's year 5, and these guys were allegiant to Jeff Fisher, as they should be. You got to keep an organization functional, and the dysfunction that has been reported pretty publicly over the last couple of weeks between the coaching staff and the front office aside, the coaching staff doesn't seem to be a group that was coming apart. And so, I can understand why those guys were loyal to Jeff Fisher throughout the season, but whoever's coming in, I don't think they need to, necessarily pick from this group for the benefit of the team. Now, your question as to what kind of style coach or, the offensive mindedness, I think to a degree you got to focus on Jared Goff, but I think you just got to have a competent plan to win. You've got so many pieces, and I've said this for the last couple of years, and you guys know this because of the games we played. The roster is damn good enough. They should have walked ass backwards into a winning record at least once. Just like oops, I slipped up and found myself 8-6. How did we do that? Oh well, let's make a playoff push. Like they should have accidentally won one season. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, look, you've got a franchise quarterback, you got Todd Gurley, whatever Tavon Austin is. I don't know what the hell he is outside of Jeff Fisher football, but he's something. And you get the opportunity to find out. The only real pieces you need to put together on offense are a couple more offensive linemen and maybe another weapon as a wide receiver. But you got tons to work with. And for a defense, I mean, this was a top 5 defense a couple weeks ago. They've had some disappointing performances these last few weeks, but when your season gets down to 4-8, 4-9, and you make a couple mistakes like this last weekend, they fumbled the opening kickoff and gave the ball to the Falcons on the 3. It's hard to put a fight up for 60 minutes in week 14 when your season's already done, and especially in year 5 for the same head coach. So I understand that. It's one of those things where you look at the roster and you say they should have done better. They didn't. But I think the bar has been set a lot higher for whoever comes in here than what was set for Jeff Fisher. And I don't think the idea of 3, 4, 5 seasons, nothing close to that, is going to be acceptable. So I don't think it has to be an offensive-minded coach. I've seen a lot of fans that say that. I think the fan base is so bored with Fisher Bowl. I think it was you guys that I came on here a couple of years ago and compared it to wet, toilet paper.
Oh, yeah.
It's that kind of a thing where you're just like grossed out by the last couple of years, and it's just boring. The game that we beat you guys earlier this year, even when you win, it's not satisfying because you win 9-6 and 9-3. That's just, even when you get a win, it's not fun. And so I think that the fan base is eager for fun, and I can understand that. But if they could win a couple more games, I think that would be enough fun. If they could make a legit playoff push, that would be more fun than any style points you might be able to get in a loss. So I think the doors are open. There's a lot of great options, and it's going to be really fun to see how this develops and who the Rams end up going after later in the offseason.
Well, I think, and it's interesting to talk about like building or picking a head coach or building a team on a quarterback coach relationship. Cause to me, it's always like whenever we're in these situations where it's like, oh, well, we want to have, this is the worst team in the NFL, like the Titans drafting Marcus Mariota or the Bucks drafting Jameis Winston and being like, oh, okay, well, he's got to have this quarterback, this coach, Lovie Smith or, Ken Wisenhunt, they got to have this quarterback for them. And it's like the quarterback is going to last. The coach isn't. They're the worst team in the NFL. They're picking the quarterback. So it's like, no matter who you bring in, it's like Pete Carroll came in to the Seattle Seahawks and didn't have they had Matt Hasselbeck that was not going to be their quarterback. They had no players that they really retained. It was all about starting from scratch. The New England Patriots didn't hire Bill Belichick with the thought of this relationship he's going to have with Tom Brady, the 6th-round pick rookie. That's going to be important for us. So it's like it can't necessarily be about Jared Goff. And when I look around, I'm just trying to look around, and there obviously you're a football guy. You look around football, not just a Rams guy, also a college guy. There are rumors about Jim Harbaugh. There's going to be rumors about a bunch of people. Do any of those rumors interest you or excite you or think that they have any credibility?
So I know Rams fans get excited about the Jim Harbaugh idea just because he's a guy with name recognition, had a lot of success, between the 49ers and Michigan. Yeah, you got to think, at least for Jim Harbaugh's sake, it would be incredibly stupid to leave what he's got going on at Michigan to come to the Rams. Now, that's not a disparaging comment about the Rams. Look, Los Angeles is a great city, wonderful market, a lot of great components to build a team. He's getting paid $9 million to coach at Michigan. He's a Michigan guy. He's in almost like a dream scenario. Why would he? I just can't come up with one good reason. The only reason, and it's so petty that it would be fitting for Jim Harbaugh, which is the only reason I give it any credence. The only reason he should leave is just to stick it to the 49ers and to be a dick and show, yeah, I'll show them, right? Which is that's not the kind of thing most head coaches do, but it's the exact kind of thing I could see Jim Harbaugh doing. Other than that, I think part of the problem is that Jeff Fisher has muddled down this team to such a, the football was just so slow and so deliberate that any option at this point is reason for optimism. Whether you're talking, guys like Kyle Shanahan or who are some of these other names that I've seen. I mean, there's so many coordinators out there, and especially when you talk about guys on the offensive side that have had recent success, you say, yeah, of course I'd want that offensive success on my team. Or when you look at, coaches with some experience, of course, that's always a good thing. The one name I keep getting thrown around from a lot of Rams fans that I don't understand is Norv Turner. When did people start getting excited about Norv Turner? Is that a name that worries you guys as Seattle fans?
How weird is it for you in the year 2016 that two of the best units in the NFL, or at least like most interesting and successful, seem to be run by Scott Linehan and Steve Spagnuolo?
About as weird as it is being talking about a guy named Norv in 2016. All that together is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, when I look around some of the coordinators, I see Todd Haley is someone that gets talked about a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, he had his chance with the Chiefs, and now he's resurrected something with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia, Jim Bob Cooter, Jim Schwartz, Terrell Austin, Kyle Shanahan, as you mentioned. There's definitely names out there. Do you think that there was anything to you about would you put any credence for you personally in terms of guy with no experience as opposed to guy with, like Jeff Fisher, lots of experience?
Yeah. I'm not pulled either direction. The one thing, if I was betting on what's more likely, Stan Kroenke, and obviously Rob, this is a guy who doesn't want to have to meddle in his team. He wants to stick a guy in there, let them run the team so that he can float between his billion other interests. I mean, this is a guy who owns Arsenal in the Premier League. He owns the Rams in the NFL. He runs the Avalanche in NHL, owns the Nuggets in the NBA, owns the Rapids in MLS, has tons of other incredibly important business properties all across the world. He doesn't want to spend time worrying about, drafting the backup left guard, right? He doesn't care about, what lineup Arsenal's fielding in whatever the League Cup is sponsored by, or they're not sponsored by this year. He doesn't want to spend time on that. He just wants to plug a guy in that he can trust to manage his affairs. And the expectations aren't really high. This is a guy who just, 4.5 losing seasons is what it took for him to fire Jeff Fisher. But he just wants to let that guy run things. And I think the real instability that came about was this last month between the Eric Dickerson story, if you guys heard about that, this story about the toxicity between the scouting staff, the personnel guys, and the coaches. And just kind of this general discord that was building up, where it was becoming apparent that this was a dysfunctional operation. At least in 2016, it might not have been before; it might have been, but it was pretty clear that that's where the point that we had reached for this team. And I think that's the kind of thing that Stan Kroenke just won't accept. And so, to that end, if I had to bet, I'd bet on somebody with some experience. Whether that's Jim Schwartz or Haley or a former coach that's out of the league. Or somebody like a Jim Harbaugh, or even a college coach that's seen as kind of a steadying presence that can manage not just the games but day-to-day affairs. The rigors of a 17-week schedule, and that's just regular season. Manage the brand, manage the property, that kind of stuff, and be a kind of brand ambassador as much as you can be an NFL head coach. Remember when the Rams went to London this year, the first of 3 seasons in a row we're going to play overseas. The Giants stayed at home and practiced all week. The Rams flew from the game against the Lions in Detroit all the way out to London. Even though they didn't have practice immediately, they just went out there to do marketing and to, help the NFL sell the brand and do NFL Playland when, you can dress your kids up in a, 4-year-old in a helmet and let them run into a brick wall to get the sensation of dealing with defensive linemen, or I don't know, whatever these kind of things that they do in these, these game experiences that they do. The Rams were really the ambassador for that, and that's kind of what Kroenke wants. That's what the NFL kind of expects from the Rams for allowing them to relocate this team. And so I think that's the kind of thing that if we're looking at a first-time, head coach, a coordinator that we're promoting, or any of these young guys, I don't think that's the likely option, only because Kroenke values stability so much more.
Rob, if you want to chime in with any sort of the coaching names that you think that would worry you the most as a Seahawks fan, any of those names make you think because the way that I know that you speak highly of Adam Gase with the Miami Dolphins. I wrote about Gase and his record this year with the Dolphins, and you look back and I was surprised to, not surprised, but actually not surprised to find out that he had spent his first 7 years working for Nick Saban at Michigan State and LSU. And it's like you get that stuff ingrained in you. And Gase had gone around for, the last few years with teams sort of passing up on him or not interviewing him or having the interview and going with someone else, including, teams that really looked bad in the aftermath. Any of those guys sticking out to you as someone that is going to be a steal for some team as soon as he does get that head coaching job?
Well, Joe makes a really good point, or should I say Tease makes a really good point about the fact that, you would have to imagine that Stan Kroenke is going to go for somebody who has, I want to say, sort of been in this position before, that he can this is why Jeff Fisher was almost perfect for him, because this was a guy who had been through a move from Houston to Tennessee, could sort of handle all of that, could be left to get on with it, could work with the GM, could sort of make the decisions and then put a product on the field, and was incredibly experienced. And the thing is now is you kind of look at this and you say, who is that guy? Who are the guys out there that could come in and do that now, if that's the kind of guy that he wants? And it's very difficult. There are not many experienced head coaches out there. I mean, I think it'd be a little bit of a stretch. I think it'd be a hard sell to the people of LA to say, hey, Tom Coughlin's the new head coach of the LA Rams. So, I mean, you look at some of the candidates, I guess that, Josh McDaniels' name has emerged already. He's at least been a head coach before. But one thing with him is when he was put in charge of the Denver Broncos and was ultimately the decision maker there, he got it so wrong. And I think that the one thing that he will want next time he goes to a job is probably less responsibility, funnily enough. He might want to just sort of be able to concentrate on the coaching side of things and maybe have somebody who is making a lot of the decisions behind the scenes, because it did not work for him at Denver. And when you look at some of that, I've been very impressed with the job that Vance Joseph has done in Miami, but he's very young. He's still quite raw. He's not typically the type of guy you'd expect to get a chance with Kroenke. Anthony Lynn's did a very good job in Buffalo, I think, for the most part. But yeah, you're going to give him a head coaching gig on the basis of 14 weeks as an offensive coordinator when he replaced Greg Roman. I think that Terrell Austin really deserves an opportunity to be a head coach. I think, the work that he's done with the Detroit defense that has lost a lot of key players over time, and he's kept it really competitive for a while. But none of these names scream LA Rams. And that is the thing. I just wonder whether or not is somebody else going to emerge. Is Harbaugh somebody that they would ultimately go for? I completely agree with everything that Joe has said about Harbaugh in this job. But he almost feels ideal because he's somebody who craves power. Craves responsibility.
I mean, I got some more names that definitely have head coaching experience. Joe, Rob, both of you guys, could chime in on any of these names. Okay. Rex Ryan, Marvin Lewis, Chuck Pagano, Gus Bradley, Mike McCoy, Chip Kelly, Drew, Ron Rivera, Mike McCarthy, John Fox.
What about Jim Mora? Give him the job. That'd be perfect.
I hate you guys. Jim Mora. Here's what, right? So we know Stan Kroenke cares about taking his teams overseas, right? Arsenal to Asia, the Rams in London, and probably going to China in 2 years to play a game. If you want to make an international splash, I'll give you a headline, Rob. I know you can appreciate this. Los Angeles Rams head coach 2017, Sir Alex Ferguson. Now, I know it probably doesn't make sense, but damn it if it wouldn't be sexy. And who does sexy better than LA?
Do you think the players in LA could understand the Scottish accent now?
There's no chance, but we can afford translators. Come on, boys, get on the pitch. You know, they'd have no idea what he's saying, but it won't matter. It'll be sexy. Come on. Showtime.
I love to imagine Sir Alex in that in the locker room there, giving Aaron Donald the hairdryer treatment after a bad first half. Just selling off the team when he falls out with them after about 5 or 6 years.
I do find it interesting.
Go ahead, Kenny. My bad.
Go ahead. No, you have a thing.
Well, I was just going to say, and I know this will throw it off only because I'm talking to you guys, that one of the most popular names from Los Angeles fans, as unlikely as it might be, but that they want Kroenke to seriously explore and throw, back up the bank, is Pete Carroll. He's got love from the USC population. He's got love across LA. He's got name recognition. There's a lot of, positive brand recognition there that a lot of Rams fans say, hey, what would it take? And let's explore it.
I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what it would take. Pete Carroll would have to quit the job, or, there's just no. I don't know I don't know if anything like that has anything like that ever happened in American pro sports, where the guy is going to the rival team when everything is going right at the team that he's with.
I can't think of one, but I think it would be very Rams to do something as unconventional about. Now, it'd also be very Rams for them to do it and then screw everything up. But let's ignore that part. I want to do the fun part with you guys.
Would the Rams show any interest in someone like John Gruden? Is that completely out of the question?
I don't think so. I think that's the kind of thing that is A, realistic, B, would get fans excited, because the sad part is name recognition is probably the number one thing that fans care about most. And the idea of promoting, and especially if you go with like a Haley or a McDaniels or one of these other guys, the recognition that the thing that they associate with that is failure. The guys that have been out of it so long, John Gruden, Bill Cowher, North Turner, for whatever reason, those guys, or even Greg Williams, I've seen a lot of Rams fans that haven't had head coaching opportunities in so long that they don't associate them with the failure that got them canned, or what forced some of those guys to just move on, like Cowher and Gruden. But they've got that name recognition where they say, hey, I know that guy. And just like when we hired Jeff Fisher, say, I remember him in that Super Bowl that one time. Yeah. He can probably he can do that again because he did it once.
Can I make one of the quick suggestion? I know there was a lot of talk a year ago about Sean Payton leaving New Orleans, and I think he got a new contract, but for a time it looked like the 49ers were showing interest there. I think for a couple of days, I mean, I was talking to a 49ers fan, and they seemed to feel pretty confident that they were actually going to get Sean Payton from New Orleans. Is that something that could, he's a big name, well established in developing a quarterback in Drew Brees. He always seems to be, at least for the last few years, seems to be permanently frustrated with events at New Orleans. And you just wonder whether or not maybe there could be a deal or something there.
I think there's a possibility there. You got to wonder though, what would what friction would be there for a defense that just got coached by Greg Williams for the last couple of years? For Sean Payton to take that over again. I don't know that they'd be it's just one of those things. And if you saw the Rams Saints game, it was pretty obvious that Sean Payton was incredibly motivated, not just to win that game, but to win it with a message. And that message was pretty loud and clear because they stomped us. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you could get it by the fans, you could get it by the ownership, but it's one of those things maybe inside the halls and among the other staff members. I don't know how it would play, but I think at this point, the good thing for the Rams is any option should be open, because it's not like they're 2-14. It's not like they've got huge personnel holes. The bigger issue is that they've got so many guys, and what they just did last offseason in re-signing Tavon Austin and Mark Barron to huge deals is that you're facing a good run of 2-3 years where you got to make some really, really, really difficult free agency decisions. And Janoris Jenkins may have just been the first of a couple quality NFL players that you're going to have to let walk because you can't keep everybody.
Well, and it's interesting to look at sort of quote unquote boring head coaching hires because Jack Del Rio in Oakland, nothing sexy about that. Gary Kubiak in Denver. I mean, it just felt like, well, that's a fit because John Elway and Gary Kubiak were teammates, and they won a Super Bowl. Mike Mularkey in Tennessee, probably the most criticized the most I've ever made fun of a head coaching hire. Mike Mularkey, as opposed to maybe like Jim Tomsula, but like that, and they're in first place. So sexy, Ben McAdoo with the Giants. It's not, Jim Caldwell with the Lions. There's nothing sexy about any of those moves, but some of these unsexy potential hires like Mike Shanahan or what have you, the guys that are going to be bandied about, who knows what's going to be the right fit, until we actually see it out there. Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll had both been fired in their careers before they had wound up with New England and Seattle. So who knows what that'll be. I'll say one more, I don't know if I doubt there is anything that could come of this, but I recently found out that Andy Reid was born in Los Angeles, and I don't know that the Kansas City Chiefs, if they I don't know. What do you guys even think of Andy Reid? What do you think of Andy Reid, Joe?
Well, I think, he's gotten them to a point where you have to evaluate them for postseason success. Remember what we talked about with Marvin Lewis and Andy Dalton for a while. It's not that they were bad, it's that there was a ceiling. And I think, I think it's going to be fair. If the Chiefs go to the playoffs again and, face an early exit, I think it's going to be a fair question as to whether that's a ceiling that Andy Reid is finding trouble punctuating for one reason or another. And when you've got a negative stigma like that, it's always better when you've got the unknown and the option is that there's no ceiling, because then you can just imagine yourself going to the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl. But when you've got a guy with a defined ceiling like that, it's hard to shake that reputation, and it's usually relatively well earned. So, I think he's one of those guys that I'm eager to see the Chiefs get in position to make the playoffs, because I want to see if that's something they can break. It'd be a great story, but if they don't, you got to assume that's going to be hanging around his neck, right?
Let's talk about
my opinion on Andy Reid quickly is just that maybe Joe, if they were serious about getting Andy Reid to the Rams, maybe Joe could cook him a big sandwich or something, and that might seal the deal.
I will cook anybody. I don't care who they hire. Look, let's cook, man. I got a fryer in the back. I got this ham hock I've been working. That's in my fridge. Look, I'll do whatever it takes.
I think it's fair at some point to just briefly talk about this game on Thursday. The Seahawks hosting the Rams. If the Seahawks win any of their last three games, they'll win the NFC West. The Rams, of course, in disarray after firing Jeff Fisher following a 42-14 loss to the Atlanta Falcons. The Rams have lost 8 of their last 9 games. They are last in the NFL in offense, both in points and yards and first downs, and are 29th in net yards per pass attempt and 30th in rushing yards per carry, and pretty much not being able to do anything offensively. And yet, as I said before,
they get it.
And yet, as I said before, I've won 4 of the last 5 games against the Seahawks. Seattle fans absolutely dread all of these meetings. We've spoken a lot about Jared Goff and, the fact that, love it or hate it, that is the quarterback that they have to at least build around for the next year to give him every opportunity to be successful. He's had 4 starts now, and without me spouting off any statistics, because the most important thing of all, Joe, will be how does he look so far?
I mean, he's got physical tools that especially when you go from, Sean Hill and Austin Davis to Nick Foles and Case Keenum. That you deal with so many limitations, right? And you just get used to the idea that there's that you're not going to have a guy of a certain caliber. And so, they draft Jared Goff. You're waiting to see him work. You're waiting to see, and not in a preseason where he's working with, second team guys and established second team veterans where that's limiting his capability to run the offense. And he gets in there and he's got so many tools, right? Footwork, athleticism, got a great arm. He's going through reads. He's doing a lot of the things that you want rookies to do, but that offense is so bad and it's so limited that it's almost like putting out a great power hitter. You know what I'm saying? who's that first baseman the Rangers gave, like Justice Smoker? Think about the great power hitters, like Ken Griffey Jr., right? You put him up there in the cleanup spot, and then you ask him to bunt. Or, you ask him, just try to slap this one sacrifice fly with no outs. Like, you want to give him a chance to do what he does and make the most of it and find out, what do you have in a guy like Pharaoh Cooper or Mike Thomas? Let those guys work more than just the first 3 routes at the bottom of the route tree. But sadly, no, 3rd and 7, and everybody's running 3 and 5 yard routes underneath the sticks for whatever reason. It's frustrating, but I think it's been more frustrating after they finally let Jared Goff start playing, because you can see that he's got the physical tools to be something real special. But until you let him do those things that, you get excited by, that if nobody's running, a 7, 8, 9 route, it's hard to be impressed by those throws, because like, wow, he really ripped off that 4-yard curl. That's great on 3rd and 6. Why are they doing that? Why are they asking him to do that? Why do you trade up for a number 1 overall quarterback and not let him try to do the things that when you're playing against Drew Brees, when you're playing against Tom Brady, and you see those guys operating at least to the intermediate stage and even downfield? Why aren't you letting him do that? And, ultimately, all the statistics you rattled off about the offense, those are part and parcel of what we've had to deal with. And I think that's a large part of what ended up getting Jeff Fisher fired, is that it was holding the entire team back, that they just don't operate any kind of conventional offense. And it's been tough, but you look at the physical skills, and you can see why he was thought so highly of going into the draft. And even without great success at Cal and great components around him, you can see that he's the kind of guy that, if you give him a chance, that there's reason to be confident that he's going to make it work. But they gotta let him give it a shot. And I think, if nothing else, John Fossil, the interim head coach, there's no reason for him not to go ahead and open it and see that. What do you have to lose? It's 4-9. If his development hasn't already been stunted, then it's not going to, by whatever you could possibly do over these last 3 games. You might as well just let him open it up and try to run something that we haven't really seen from the Rams all year.
I mean, in this podcast, obviously, we talked about the NFL draft for the whole year, and we spent a lot of time last year talking about Jared Goff, not super highly, not to the point of ever thinking that he was deserving of the selection of a number 1 pick. And similarly of Carson Wentz, not believing that there was a quarterback in the draft last year that was of that caliber, let alone 2 teams trading away many picks to get these 2 players. Rob, what were some of your biggest concerns, if you could go back and highlight a couple of your biggest concerns about Jared Goff, so that maybe we could direct those towards Joe to see if it's something that is still presenting itself as an issue, or if it's something that he's improved?
I think my biggest concern with him was that what you would see from Jared Goff is some of the most beautiful passes that you could imagine. I mean, there was one throw he had against Washington at Husky Stadium fairly early in the season, where he sort of really slipped it into a tight window, through 2 defensive backs. Perfect placement, perfect arm strength, just accuracy, just a superb throw in what is a really good Washington secondary, by the way. And you see a pass like that, and you think, wow, this guy's got supreme natural talent throwing the ball. But then he would invariably have a game like he did at Utah, where he had 5 interceptions. And it reminded me, and I'm not saying this after the fact, we were saying this last year as well. It reminded me a lot of Brock Osweiler in college, because Osweiler, if people remember when he was at Arizona State, would have these games where he would be just slotting throws into the tightest windows. His size and his ability to sort of, a bit more time in the pocket, ability to take his time and throw. He could have some really good throws and had some good games at Arizona State, but then he would have a complete meltdown like he did against Boise State, I think, in his final college game before he turned pro. So, and he had multiple interceptions in games, a bit like Jared Goff. So there were some similarities there. I hope for the Rams' sake that's really where it's going to end, and that over time Jared Goff is going to become a much better quarterback than Brock Osweiler has proven to be. I will say about this game, I am a little bit fearful of it, Kenny, not just because the Rams seem to have the Seahawks number and seem to save. The Rams are capable of just being wretched one week and then just giving the Seahawks a good old shoe-in the next week. So I'm looking at last year, and if you remember, the Tennessee Titans fired Ken Wisenhunt after week 8. And the previous 4 weeks, and they had a rookie quarterback called Marcus Mariota. And the previous 4 weeks, they'd scored 13, 10, 7, and 6. They fire Ken Wisenhunt, and the very next game, they score 34 points in the Superdome and beat the Saints. Now, admittedly, the Saints' defense was not good at all last year. So scoring 34 points against them was not a big achievement. But it kind of works to Joe's point that all of a sudden the shackles came off that team. They stopped trying to be, the vision of this coach was maybe a little bit conservative, wanted to protect the rookie quarterback, didn't want to chance too many things. And all of a sudden, here's Mike Mularkey with nothing to lose and came up with a completely different, more exotic game plan. If I remember in that game, he went for it a couple of times on 4th down and took a few chances. And that's kind of what the Rams might well do in this game. They might open up their offense completely. And do you know what? Jared Goff might not be able to deliver. He might not be able to do it. They might be able to bottle Todd Gurley up. It might be a long night for the Rams. Or they might just be able to put a few points on the board, put a bit of pressure on the Seahawks. And if that happens, I worry because Aaron Donald and the rest of that defensive line have really they've had their way with the Seahawks offensive line for the last 3 years. So, and I do fear the idea of sort of Kenny Britt having a big game or Tavon Austin having a big game. I could see this being a really awkward one for the Seahawks. I think the one thing that maybe works for them is that it's on Thursday. This is going to be a whirlwind for this team. I'm sure that the interim head coach didn't go into work today necessarily expecting that Jeff Fisher was going to lose his job. And now they've got, 2 days to plan for this before they maybe travel to Seattle? I mean, that's not a lot of time to sort of implement a new game plan and try and mix things around. So it might work into the Seahawks' favor that it was on a Thursday. If it was on a Sunday, I'd be even more sort of fearful of this game coming up next.
The other thing, and I throw this only because the Rams lost so many guys, and I know James Laurinaitis talked about it at the end of last year, is that whether it's the coaching staff or, like you got mentioned, Kenny Britt and Tavon Austin, a lot of these guys know that these last couple of games, these last 3 games, are just auditions for other teams. They may have been favorite pets of Jeff Fisher, but with a new head coach coming in, there's no certainty that they're going to be well liked by whoever comes in. And so a lot of these guys with contracts expiring even this year know that what they've got to put out these last 3 years is good audition tape for the rest of the league heading into free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it gives me some solace is I think any team is worse off when people are playing like individuals rather than as a team. So if it's going to be any of these guys thinking I got to put my best tape up there, that's when you can sort of lose focus of whether or not you're helping the 10 guys standing next to you. And going up against a team like the Seahawks, which has had plenty of wins over the last 5 years, and playing in Seattle, the Seahawks, I just need them to win this game and lock up the division and move on to next week with hopefully some more rationality from the fans. Joe, we're going to let you go, but I guess on that note, there's a lot of Seahawks fans that are so upset and believe that the Seattle Seahawks are so terrible. You're sitting at there, having rooting for the Rams, and a lot when people get fired, a lot of tweets come out about how long things have been bad and all this kind of stuff. And I think that the Rams have 4 winning seasons in the last 27 years. It's not going to happen this year, of course. It's just the coach is fired, and your star players from the last couple of years like Todd Gurley and Tavon Austin and Jared Goff not playing super well. There are plenty of bright spots, of course, Aaron Donald and the like, and Mark Barron. But overall, I guess would be your thoughts for this, whatever the perspective is of Seattle Seahawks fans who believe that the Seahawks are going to lose this week and that Russell Wilson will throw 7 interceptions and that they'll give up 50 points without Earl Thomas. What is your perspective on the Rams this week? What do you believe will happen in the game?
So here's the way I've generally approached Rams football under Jeff Fisher, and it's going to have to be recalibrated soon. Is that the game will be 4 quarters long. The offense will get snaps, the defense will get snaps, and maybe even special teams. And what we'll see is some passes, some runs, a couple completions, couple incompletions, couple rushes, punts, field goals, and the like. And then there will be a week where what we talk about is the same thing we've talked about for the last 13 years, because it's been 13 years since the Rams had a single winning season. That's a long time. The way I like to put it to Rams fans is that I've pretty much lived two lives since the last time the Rams had a winning season. When they were winning in 2003, I was a young man. I was still in college. I was single. I was carefree. The Rams were winning, and the world was a glorious place. Then I joined the Army. I got married. I had a kid. Barack Obama got elected. Barack Obama got unelected. Donald Trump got elected. This is since the last time the Rams won. I don't even think there was an internet. There may not have been cars. I don't think we had indoor plumbing. Kenny, if you have Seahawks fans that are complaining about anything, I want you to find a mirror. I want you to look at that person and tell that person to shut up. Tell them to shut up. You guys have had great success. You guys have won Super Bowls. I don't want to hear none from y'all about teams sucking. I have so much expertise. Turf Show Times is a fun fact, and by fun I mean horrible. Turf Show Times is the only SB Nation NFL site that has never covered a single winning season. The Cleveland Browns, Dogs by Nature, has covered a winning season. Jacksonville Jaguars, Big Cat Country. The Rams are, and Turf Show Times, the only site that hasn't covered winning season. I don't even know what it's like. I don't even know how to cover. Do you do live threads for the playoffs? Do you wear pants? I don't know what the rules are. What am I supposed to do? I'm gonna give you the login, and you can just run Turf Show Times for a day because I'm not gonna know what the hell to do.
That is a very good summation of how things can get. Rams' last winning season is 2003, for those out there wondering. Joe, thank you so much for talking to us. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about more with all the amount of time we did spend talking about potential head coaching hires that probably will never come to fruition. It'll probably see someone else we didn't even discuss once.
Well, holler at me in the winter, and we'll talk about some draft stuff. And as Rob knows, the famous chant, it's Los Angeles Rams in the which conference, Rob? NFC. We're by far the most mediocre team the West Coast has ever seen. Thanks for having me on, guys.
I like the way you limited it to the West Coast instead of the world, but that's fine.
Let's be honest. I don't want to embellish things on the way out.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Joe. Also, thank you, Rob. But in general, thank you, Joe. Follow him on Twitter at 3K_.
Yeah, if you want to.
At Turf Show Times. Go to Turf Show Times. Be there for the Thursday game. Color Rush, guys. Color Rush. We didn't even talk about Color Rush. Thank you, Joe, for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Holler at me.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
All right, that was Joe again for Turf Show Times, talking about the Rams, talking about the Rams, Jeff Fisher, and how things could potentially change this week with the offense and Jared Goff. It is sort of interesting. I mean, but just the fact that, hey, I can't see that they have been going over plays in the playbook that they haven't been utilizing. Like, they still has to go out there and learn the said plays and. Whatever it's going to take next year. Certainly hiring an offensive-minded coach should make them more watchable, and being that they are a team that just does not move the football. We've seen that in about half of the Seahawks games. All of their road NFC games, we've seen what the Rams play like almost every single week. So that's sort of another thing to understand when you talk about teams sucking or not sucking, is being able to that. And remember, the Rams were supposed to have a good defense. Their the Seahawks just gave up over 25 points for the first time all season. The Rams have done that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So, and that's another thing that happens when your offense turns over the ball and doesn't move the football and gives good field position to the other team most of the time. And the other thing I would say is football is a pretty simple game. Do not turn the ball over more than the other team. The Rams turn it over a lot, and they don't force turnovers very much. So what the Seahawks need to do this week is just protect the football, and I think they'll be okay. After that, there's not too much to think about. Hopefully the game is out of, is within the win column by halftime or something. Would be very relaxing, and the Seahawks can say, well, we won the division. Now let's focus on, winning these next 2 games and hopefully getting the 2 seed and then reevaluating after that. Rob, I think we can also start to call it quits. Any other final thoughts or things that we didn't get to?
No, just a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, I agree with what you just said there about the game. I think that what I would expect really is kind of the unexpected from the Rams. I think they're going to try one or two, little wrinkles, maybe a trick play here or there. I would imagine that they would say to Jared Goff, just go out there and be you, enjoy the game, take some shots. And if they have a bit of success early on, then it will pressure the Seahawks. If the Seahawks manage to just sort of survive the first couple of series and get some points themselves, then it could escalate pretty quickly. So I think it will benefit the Seahawks being on a Thursday. Just a couple of draft points as well, before we go. Tony Pauline and people who follow Seahawks Draft Blog will know that I'm a big fan of Tony's. I've done a couple of podcasts with him in the past. He's a good guy and without a doubt for me the best draft insider on the internet. And he has provided a new website. He used to be draftinsider.net. He's now at Draft Analyst. His new website. He's put some great info on there. There's a bit of stuff about the Washington Huskies players that are going to turn pro. So no big surprises that Sidney Jones and John Ross look as if they're going to go pro. He was saying that there's the feeling within the league that John Ross could go in the top 18 picks, which would be pretty high. I think there's a chance that he could land in Philadelphia, having watched some of their game against Washington at the weekend. He also said that Elijah Qualls was thinking of turning pro. Buda Baker is obviously thinking of going pro as well. But Azim Victor's looking like he's going to return next year. Didn't seem to be much on Vita Vea, though. And Greg Gaines were the two other defensive tackles. But I thought it was interesting that a lot of Huskies there seemingly going to be turning pro. And the other thing you mentioned was that Garrett Bowles, a player that we've talked a lot about, Kenny, I would go as far to say that in terms of the Seahawks, he's my favorite option for them in the first round based on what I've seen so far. Garrett Bowles from Utah, it's looking like he was sort of insinuating that the league expects that he will turn pro. And that he could go in the top 20. So this is what I've kind of feared here, that eventually as more and more people become aware of Garrett Bowles, that he will start to move up the boards. And while I've been projecting him to the Seahawks in the late first round, it was more hope than anything. And I wanted to see other people projecting him earlier than that before I started moving up my own personal mock drafts. Now that I've seen Tony's suggestion there that he's going to go in the top 20, I can't fight it anymore. I think in my next mock draft, I'm going to put him right up there, potentially in the top 15 picks. I think he's as good as that. And it means that the Seahawks probably, if you're hoping that they're going to take a tackle in the first round next year, it's going to make it quite difficult. And I think it may mean that they essentially turn their attention to other needs. Unless other tackles emerge or declare that are unexpected, they might turn their attentions to other needs. And I think that interior pass rush could develop into one of their more serious needs moving forward.
Well, there you have it. And the Seahawks and Rams play this Thursday night. Check out those color rush uniforms and hopefully check out a win for the Seattle Seahawks that gets them the NFC West and moves them forward in the talks. And hey, if they get that bye week, maybe CJ Prosise is ready for the next round. How about that for a thought? Follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Go to FieldGoals.com. You can follow us on Twitter at FieldGoals or myself at Kenneth Arthur S. I'll have some articles coming out on Rolling Stone. I've had some. I had like 3 last week, so check that out at RollingStone.com/sports. SportsOnEarth.com. Several articles going up there. Check out this podcast and go see local comedy. That's it for this week on 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Enjoy the game and then come back next time for a new edition of the draft.